Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton and Ben. This is a podcast about starting over. It is about what it takes to leave the familiar behind and the courage it takes to begin again in a land that isn't yet home. Together with my co-host Ben Liebenberg, we explore the untold stories of migration. Not just where people went, but why they left, what they held on to, and what they've had to let go. Each episode, we sit down with someone who's made that leap. Someone who's left behind not just places, but languages, careers, communities, and sometimes even parts of themselves. They share what called them forward, what nearly held them back, and what they've come to understand about identity, belonging, and starting again. Produced in partnership with Southern Crossings, a community for South Africans forging new lives in Australia, this podcast is a place to feel seen, heard, and understood. Because this isn't just about visas or paperwork. It's about identity, loss, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life piece by piece. So wherever you are on your journey, arriving, settling, or still thinking about it, welcome. This is where stories connect us all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This information to customers travelling on the Land Airways flight LA 800 question 321 service to Auckland and Santiago.
Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van der Walt, and with me is my co-host and fellow explorer, and this time sitting in a hotel room, Ben Liebenberg. Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
Hello, Anton. How are you? Yeah.
Where are you exploring at the moment?
I'm exploring Ballarat, which is country Victoria.
Okay, it is probably 1 or 2 degrees there outside, right?
Exactly. Everybody knows, Australia knows that Ballarat's notorious for their cold winters. So, yeah, that's where I am at today.
Oh, that's great. Well, this podcast is where we unpack the real stories of migration, identity, and belonging. And we've made the leap and are thinking about it, or simply curious. You're in the right place. Each story reveals what we hold on to, what we leave behind, and what we found along the way. And so today we are joined by someone whose journey brings new heart and perspective to it all. We're joined by Munro Donen, who originates from Johannesburg, started his life in Houghton in Johannesburg and was schooled in Johannesburg and eventually ended up in Wits to study BCom. Munro has been in Australia for quite a while, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And also, in particular, which I don't want to raise now, and we'll get to that point about particular issue, what triggered the situation for Munro to be here, and we want to hear more about that. He remembers quite fondly how his father, seeing him off at the airport, was telling him that, my home is always welcome to you. You can come back anytime. But I think what we'll talk about is Munro has found a new safe place in Australia. Munro started off his career here in Sydney as a real estate consultant. That's also what he did in South Africa. But if you look at his business card, he's called himself a property buyer. So we'll get to that. So Munro, welcome to our podcast. We're really stoked to have you here.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Yeah, we not often, Ben, get to talk to a Witsie, do we?
No, not often.
No.
Well, there's 7,000 of us in Australia, just by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, well done.
Well, you're a good company. My wife also went to Wits, so I travelled all the way from Pretoria to Wits over, quite often with my little yellow Toyota to go and visit my girlfriend in Wits.
Yep.
And I wasn't very good at English at the time, so it was a challenge.
At the time, yeah.
At the time. Yes,
okay.
at the time.
All right.
Yes.
Fair enough.
But there's certain things been in a relationship that doesn't need a language, so it worked out. So Munro, let's just talk a little bit about you. So Ben, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we just normally kick off and find out a little bit about your childhood, what you remember, where you brought up, how you spent the first formative years, and what made you who you are.
Okay. So where I was brought up in Johannesburg. I was brought up in Houghton. My family were in real estate. My dad was in real estate. My dad was also very much involved with the old DP in those days. I think it was called the PFP before it was called the DP, and involved in politics. And obviously, so yeah, had some interesting experiences in my life. And one of them being that Nelson Mandela was our neighbour.
Oh,
Who lived right next door us, yeah. And my parents were personally friendly with him. He used to literally pop in, knock on the door and come in for a coffee or a tea. My father used to play the organ, and Nelson used to sit and watch him playing. My mother enjoyed gardening, loved gardening. I think they were both in their 60s or 70s at the time. And it was so sweet watching these two little old people in the garden planting flowers, and Nelson telling my mother that this didn't go there and that didn't work with this one, etc., etc. And it was quite an experience. And a number of years later, before I'd left South Africa, I was actually at the airport picking somebody up, as we did in South Africa. They didn't have Ubers in those days. And I was actually standing, they'd cordoned off and closed off the whole airport, and some dignitary had arrived when, lo and behold, it was Mr. Mandela, President Mandela in those days. And he saw me standing behind the cordoned off area, and he came up to me and he shook my hand, and I felt, oh my God, I feel like a celebrity. Everybody's wondering why he's greeting me and talking to me. And he said to me, and how is your father? I said, very well, thank you, but I think you've got more important people to talk to here. But that was just the kind of person he was. He was very chatty and very warm and very friendly.
Yeah. Amazing story, eh?
Yes, so tell us, the thing that we got into is some of the things that happened to you in your later years. But tell us a little bit about how you grew up. Your kind of, as Ben said, the formative years. What was your life like as a kid in Houghton?
Yeah, I think pretty good. We had a pretty good life. Well, I came from a very close family, very close-knit family. I have a sister as well. The four of us, grandparents, uncles, aunts, etc. It was amazing times. You know, I mean, we all know we lived in South Africa. We didn't really know what was going on around us or what was happening outside in the world, because until 1976, we never had television. And then when we did have television, we were very limited to what we could see and what we couldn't see. I don't think I heard the name Mandela till I was about 18 or 20, so I didn't even know anything about it. So we lived in this little bubble, but it felt safe and it felt secure.
Yeah.
So what did you do as a kid to keep yourself busy? Did you very social, sports, cultural? What are the things that excited you?
I was very diligent with my homework and my schoolwork. I studied very hard, worked very hard. I played piano, which I absolutely hated, but I did it because my parents wanted me to do it. Believe me, I can't play one note today if I even had to try. And then just, the regular socializing with friends. I enjoyed tennis at the time. I used to swim, not hugely on the sports field. I was more of an academic.
Yeah. And so you went directly after school into Wits, right?
Yep, I was at Wits from 85 to 87.
Okay.
I graduated in 1987. They were great years at Wits, involved with many student bodies, met some very interesting people. And it was the time, when things were starting to change in South Africa. They hadn't yet, but had great times. Used to remember sitting in, I don't remember where it was, wherever we used to have coffee and tea and lunches and whatever, and socializing and, catching up with people. And you mentioned Pretoria. We used to run to Pretoria on the weekends, go clubbing and go to restaurants and bars. It was always like an adventure to go out to Pretoria. And we obviously had friends that used to come to Johannesburg. We used to hang around, I don't know if you remember the old Rocky Street, and Hillbrow as it was in those days. And it wasn't the Wild West. It was a pretty hip and trendy place. Melville, Hillbrow, Rocky. I can't believe I'm remembering all this stuff because it's like bringing it back from a very, very, very deep chest that's been piled.
Yeah, it's about similar time, and just also early 80s. I remember, Munro, that because I grew up in Johannesburg or in Randburg actually, and And then my parents moved to Pretoria. I went to the army, and then, of course, I went back to go there and get to uni. But the thing that I was really interested in was music. And so not playing music. My father was very musical, and so was I, but I never, as you, I was told to play the piano, and that took all the music out of me, unfortunately.
exactly.
So, but Hillbrow Records and Tapes is what I frequented a lot. And
There
so
were
I
amazing,
bought a
amazing
lot of
record shops.
Yeah. So I bought a lot of records there. I remember my dad was very into classical music, like I suppose that generation was, right? And so he was very into classical music. He worked at the SABC, and so he also had a little radio station that he was going on live over weekends. And so I would often go with him to the SABC and listen to, because he played classical music, and I think it was like an international radio station. But he kind of, I grew up with classical music, and I never really liked it up to a certain point. He gave me a book, and then suddenly I just went to buy so many classical records and so on. And I remember doing that at Hillbrow Records and Tapes. So it's a very fond memory for me, personally.
Do you remember the old exclusive books and all the coffee shops?
Yes.
They had those amazing European coffee shops. Café
Mm.
Vienne, Café Paris. I can't believe they're coming back to me, these names.
Yeah, so it's an amazing story. And I also remember, you spending the time at Wits, as I said earlier, going there, go and talk to the Engelsman. And so it was very nice. And so you had, you say 3-4 years at university. Were you
4 years.
Were you a day student, or were you
Yes, I was. I started off
in
3
boarding?
years, and then the last year I actually wanted to work and study, so I extended it to 4 years. I wanted to get some work experience, and a little bit different than it is today. So just by extending a year, I was able to work and study at the same time.
Yeah. So what did you do? What work did you do?
Well, my dad was in
Then.
real estate. My dad owned the hotel at the airport, the Southern Sun Hotel at the airport. He was in real estate, commercial property development, and I actually worked with him. In those days, residential real estate had separated from commercial real estate, and it was the early days where people were specializing in different areas, and I worked in commercial, industrial, and retail for probably 5-6 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you look like you were always going to go into real estate. Looks like it.
Yes. If I had my choice, I would have gone to hotel school, but I wasn't allowed to do that. I was told you're going to get an education and then you can go to hotel school. And my father, having owned a hotel, was very anti me working in a hotel. I think it was very different in those days that if you worked in a hotel, you basically started at the bottom. You cleaned the floors in the kitchens, and you didn't go in. There was no management, and that you had to start at the bottom. And went and got my degree, and then called the hotel school, and I was told that I'm overqualified.
So what is it at the hotel school that attracted you? You say that I just haven't spoken those words of a hotel school probably for 40 years, right?
Yep.
I mean, yes,
Yep.
I remember that. So what is it that attracted you?
Anton, what attracted me, I'm very much a people person. I was going to be a chartered accountant. I did accounting, but I did not do my CA at that time and do the board because I wasn't really interested. All my friends landed up being accountants, and it just wasn't for me. I'm a people person. I like integrating. I like networking with people. And as an accountant, that wasn't really where I saw my future. Academically, I could do it, but psychologically, it wasn't me.
So then you qualified, and then you went straight into real estate after that, right? And so because
I
you're now
qualified-
overqualified for.
Yep. Then I had to actually went to the army because I studied first, as you know how it used to work in those days. I studied first, and I went then to the army. I was in Houghton, and working there, I actually was working for the army newspaper in marketing and sales.
Okay.
And I used to secure advertising and marketing for the newspaper. And I actually did very well. That my commander or brigadier, whatever he was, captain in those days, used to actually let me stay at home. So I used to drive home and I would come to work in the morning. So I didn't actually have to stay in army camp, which was fantastic. Wow. I really enjoyed it. And then, as I say, that was coming up to 1990 when Mandela came into power. And one day we woke up and they told us to pack our bags. We're going home. And I thought, well, what's happened here? And I used to joke. I used to say I was in for 2 years and I got off 9 months for good behavior.
For good behavior. Yeah, good behavior. No, that's excellent.
We were all shocked. We were told, pack your bags, you're going home.
Wow. And those days, were you just doing 1 year or was it supposed to be 2 years?
The army was 2 years in those days. So I did just 9 months shy of two.
Okay. Interesting. So your army experience, obviously you enjoyed that. That's right up your alley. I mean, that's really interesting because I've heard so many people doing different things in the army, but that's the first time I've heard about that gig.
Yeah, I didn't think the army was my thing, Ben, but I actually really enjoyed that time. And I, made a lot of friends and, I had quite a few friends that were at Meds, which was round the corner from Houghton, dentists and doctors, etc. And it was a really nice time, I must say. It was something I dreaded, but I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think in hindsight, most of us probably experienced that. It was enjoyable, but we don't really want to go back either.
No. It was great for discipline. I never knew how to make a bed because, as you know, we grew up in South Africa. We had maids and nannies running around behind us. So I actually had to learn how to make a bed, how to wash things, do things. So it prepared me for Australia. That was good.
Yeah.
It probably prepared you a little bit for Afrikaans as well, didn't it? I mean, I've got a lot of English friends that, they learnt the real Afrikaans in the army.
Yeah, so I think my Afrikaans was never great, but it was okay. I got by, and I think most people at that stage, if you were brought up English speaking, people would speak to you in Afrikaans and you'd answer them in English. It was quite natural, and it just flowed.
Yeah, true.
So then you finished the army, you got booted out and said, okay, fine, you don't have to continue.
Yeah.
And then did you go straight into real estate from there?
Yes. So I'd started working in real estate before the army, and then I continued working in real estate until I left in 99. So literally, I think till January, February, I left in November.
Yeah, so if I understood it, your father was in real estate, and he seemed to, from what I understand, you quite already a bit older in that sense, right? So you talk about him being in the 70s and stuff like that. So in his 70s, so did he get you quite late, or how did that work?
My parents were both married before. They never had children. So my mother was 38 and my father was 42 when I was born. And I'm the oldest. My sister's 18 months younger than me. So, yeah, a lot of my friends' parents were a lot younger, but my parents, they were very young in their ways. I must say they were very youngish people for their time. But it was different because my friends were 20 and their parents were 40, and I was 20 and my parents were 60.
Yeah. It's interesting. So it was a very roundabout way for me asking this question, which I now understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And so your father was in real estate. So did you work in his business when you went out, or did you go out on your own or somewhere else?
No, I worked in his business. We sold the business to a company actually from Pretoria about 2 years before I left, and then I was waiting for my visa to come through, and I actually went to work for another real estate company that we had a close relationship with, and I worked there for 2 years before I immigrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you gave up your job and waiting for your papers, was it everything signed and sealed? Were you sure you're going to get it? It's just a matter of time, or was there still a possibility that you could not get your visa and immigrate?
Yeah. Ben, it was interesting because I'd been coming to Australia for many years on holiday. I have a lot of friends and family here. And one day I'd come here on holiday, and I'll never forget, I actually went with a cousin of mine to a coffee shop in Double Bay in Sydney. And as I call it, double pay, because everything costs double. And coming from South Africa, I'll never forget, coming from South Africa where I could go to a coffee shop in Rosebank or Sandton or Lovo or whatever it might be. And, for 10 rand in those days, you could get a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. And I came here, and I think it was 2-1 or 3-1 when I got here. I'd come and my cousin said, let's go to this amazing coffee place in Double Bay. And I never even looked at the menu, and I said, I love chocolate mud cake, which we never got in South Africa. And I'll have a mud cake and a coffee. And when the bill came, it was like 4 times more than South Africa. And I'd asked them if they'd made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said to my cousin, I quite like this place. Do you know any immigration consultants I can see? And that afternoon, I actually went to see a lovely lady by the name of Vera Poole. She worked at PwC. And she said to me, look, I think we can get you in. I could get in on the point system. And also because I'd been in a family business, I was assessed by the Australian Institute of Management and degree qualified and age. I had enough points. I put it in. I think it took about 4 years to come through, but in the middle of the whole story, what had happened was they changed the requirements for the visa. And if you weren't already in the system, you had to reapply again. And it was very interesting because in those days, I mean, we didn't have the internet and stuff we have today. It was basically, I got a call from Vera. She told me I need to be in Sydney in the next week. Come and sit in her office and we need to find a new category. And the next night I was on a plane to Sydney and I came in and sat in her office for hours and hours. We were going through books and manuals. It wasn't like doing things on the internet today. And she found another avenue that we could apply through. And once that did go through, it took about a year. So it was pretty quick.
Talk to us a little bit about your decision to come across at the time. I think you had a particular incident that happened that kind of expedited your thoughts about coming to spend more time in Australia.
Yeah, no, Anton, that is correct. That episode happened in 1990, actually 10 years before I left South Africa. Yeah. I was in a violent carjacking. Outside my parents' home, and you would have thought in a street like that with security and everything, with Nelson Mandela across the way. It was a closed-off street. They still managed to get in. I literally drove up to my parents' home. I'd come back from the gym, I'll never forget, at the old Edwardians Club. Driven up to the house, stopped outside, pressed the button for the gates to open, electronic gates. And as soon as I'd stopped the car, I read Opel Monza, how I remember this is amazing, pulled up right behind me, and before I knew it, 4 guys jumped out. The car was surrounded. I had a little small BMW, and as I opened up my door, I don't know what made me open the door, but I opened the door and got out. And the next thing is I had a gun to my head, and the other 4 doors were open and people had jumped in, and the gun was pulled. The trigger was pulled, but there was no bullet in the gun. So that happened very, very quickly, and off the car went, and I was left standing there in dismay, and my parents ran out. They saw me outside, and I started screaming, and the neighbours came, etc., and the security came. And it was an interesting experience at that time because this was really the beginning of carjackings. This wasn't something that people had been through, a lot in South Africa at that time. And, it was basically, well, you'll get over it and you'll be fine. They didn't know about trauma therapy or any of those type of things. And 9 months later, I actually went into quite a bad depression, which I didn't know what it was at the time. I just demotivated, lost interest, and I'm not that kind of person at all. And was seeing a therapist, etc., and that's, when I realized that this had actually affected me more than what I actually thought it had. And then it was the decision, well, what do I do with my life? And South Africa was just going backwards in so many ways. And as much as I loved South Africa and I loved my life and I loved my family and everything, I never had any problems. This was something I didn't want to deal with. And if I had an avenue to leave, I would have done it. Actually, before I actually went to the army, I actually spent a year in the UK in London working for a family member who had a property business there as well. And that was a great experience, but London just wasn't for me. That weather, that lifestyle, I mean, I loved the buzz and the sophistication, but it just wasn't for me. And I came back to South Africa.
Yeah, so that must have been traumatic. And then, of course, I think they call it PTSD nowadays.
Correct.
And so
we didn't know about those words in those days.
No. I mean, even we went to the army and came out, and some people had PTSD, but it wasn't called that either. It was something else, right? And so, but yes, And I can imagine that, because then, forever you're looking over your shoulder. You don't know when it's going to happen next, and so on and so on. And so that's really what said to you, okay, I'm going to make a life somewhere else. But that still then took 10 years for you to get across, right?
It did. It was a decision, and I think probably what capped the whole thing was, I think in 93 or 94, I was actually in a restaurant in Sandton, and the restaurant was held up as well. Luckily, I had left a few minutes before. For some reason, I don't know what happened, but divine intervention must have been on my side. And I'd left, and in those days, we didn't have mobile phones. And so I'd left the restaurant and gone home. And the next morning, one of my friends phoned me and said, "You're so lucky to get out of there. This is what happened last night." And they were actually locked in the fridge in the restaurant, in a big fridge. And, then they left, and they took people's car keys, stole their cars, their jewelry, etc. So I think when that happened, it was like, well, you've dodged a bullet this time. This is a sign you need to make a move.
All right, so that was kind of easy decisions then in the end to do that, but probably also hard, because did you leave your family behind?
I did. Yeah, I
And your
left
parents
two
were already
older parents. Yep, I was lucky. I had a sister there who was married and had children, and the family decision was, you need to go.
Right.
Oh, right. So you were very much supported by the family and
Yeah.
encouraged. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And I suppose from a work point of view as well, you're well established, you've been in the game a long time, and as we know, real estate's a lot about connections and, just being established and well known. So that must have been hard giving all of that up.
Yeah, it was. And coming here, real estate in Australia was very, very different to South Africa. I mean, Sydney's a world-class city, an expensive city, and it always has been. I mean, it wasn't that expensive when I'd moved here. But the thing was that, I had to learn everything from scratch, from the beginning. And I tried as quickly as possible to integrate within Australian community and society. I didn't hang around South Africans, to be honest with you, in the beginning, because a lot of people were doing that. It was a natural recourse to hang around South Africans where you had something in common. But I decided, if you're going to get into this, you need to get into it. You need to understand the mindset. You need to have Australian friends. And when I was kind of integrating more, then I did go back to a lot of my South African friends and network, etc. And I think over the years, which is 27 years now, nearly coming up, now I'm involved in a lot of things with South African networks, South African business networks. I'm a chapter member on the WITS Alumni Committee, New South Wales. We raise money for WITS. So I'm doing a lot more now than I did then, but I've also got more time on my hands. I'm settled now, and those are the kind of things that are my hobby. That's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah. But I think it's kind of like natural as well. I think, I'm pretty much the same vintage as you. I went pretty much the same time that you said to university. I went to university, although I went to the army first. But yeah, same thing. I came over, I think, a year after you came over. So, we had the same journey, and we said the same, we're not necessarily going to just, mix with South Africans. We want to assimilate in the society here and make friends and that. But I think as you've been here much longer and you get established, as you say, it's actually quite nice to reconnect with your roots and reconnect with South Africans. And, I think it's something, that you, over time, you get at ease, and, then it's quite nice to go back and, or just connect again,
Yeah, and I was going back to South Africa every year, twice a year, to see my family. So I did that for many, many years until my parents passed on.
So I just want to ask you, so you say it was very different real estate in South Africa to Australia. Explain a little bit for us that's not in real estate. What does that mean? Why is it different? I mean, aren't you just selling a property in one place, not another place?
Okay, so I started working very differently in a very different area of real estate. I wasn't working as a sales agent. I worked as what's called a buyer's agent. Being a buyer's agent, I was helping people buy property, and that was something that was in the US and was in Australia. So I had to learn a lot of different ways of doing things. The Australian property market moves very, very quickly. It's not like things in South Africa where you try and sell something, it can take a year or 2 years to sell. Here, things sell in days. They sell very quickly. And there's always competition. There's very seldom, certainly where I operate in the eastern suburbs, there's a lot of competition. And there's never really only one buyer for a property. Population's growing. Housing stock is definitely not and hasn't grown for a long time. There's just not enough land. Everybody wants to live in the same places. And if you can't go out, you've got to go up. So, apartments became a bigger thing and houses just became more valuable and more in demand. And I actually work with a lot of expats, Australians that have lived overseas. I bought for a South African couple that had moved to the UK and then to Australia. And they thought it was quite easy to buy here. And after a few weeks of trying on their own, they quickly realized that this is not easy and you do need help. The price guides are totally unreliable. You really need to understand, and you need to move pretty quickly if you're going to secure a property in the city. And everything sells by auction, as you know. In South Africa, the only things that sold by auction were distress sales.
Yes.
Yeah, very different culture.
Yeah. And then Sydney itself is a different market, for instance, than the region or other places. I'd imagine that Sydney and Melbourne are similar, but it won't be necessarily the same. And I mean, Sydney is probably one of the most expensive places to buy property almost anywhere in the world now, isn't it?
It is. It's in the top 5. Absolutely. Most definitely.
So what were the things that were easier for you in the property market and that you didn't find in South Africa, but you found here?
What I found here, I like the dynamic, the way it moved, the speed at which it moved, that it was fast moving, fast paced, and there was a lot of pressure, which I enjoy. I enjoy working under pressure. And, that was really exciting for me. It was dynamic. I was discovering things. I mean, in those days, it was quite funny. And I'm thinking of a story. When I first started working in real estate here, we didn't have GPS in the cars, and we certainly didn't have it on the mobile phones. And you had what was called the Melway, or the book you used to have a look at. And when I was still learning my way around Sydney, it was an interesting experience, because if I was going to meet a client in the morning, I didn't know where I was going. And I'd be so scared I would get lost, and especially driving in roads where you can't turn right, you can't turn left. This road, it was very different driving in Sydney. So I would very often go there at night, the night before, and just see the area, see where I was going, so I didn't make a fool of myself the next day when I was trying to find somewhere. And also the other thing as well, in South Africa, properties would be open on a Sunday. They'd open at 9 until 3. You had time. Here, everything was open 15, 20 minutes. And if you weren't there, it was gone. Forget the idea of, in South Africa, you wanted to see something. I'd pick up a client and drive them around. Here, it didn't happen. There was just not that level of service. You came to the open for inspection between 15 and 20 or 30 minutes. And if you didn't get there, good luck. See you later, as the Australians say. It just didn't work that way. And one of the things that I brought over from South Africa, and I think South Africans, the way we worked and our culture and our level of service was that great and so good. And that's why so many South Africans have done so well in real estate in Australia, is that I would pick up my clients. I would drive them around. I would talk to them, because I knew that time in the car was really important to build rapport. And it was really important, it was different. And I think a lot of things I learned that I brought over from South Africa definitely held me in good stead. And I actually taught a lot of my Australian colleagues who used to think I was crazy, but then they started copying me.
Yes.
Because they saw it worked.
It's interesting that you say that. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that's the one thing that doesn't happen here, and you made it happen. It doesn't. I think it's the one thing that is a shock to people, Ben, when they, when they come across, and that's what everybody tells us. And I suppose we experienced it ourselves. You come across.
We were definitely no different. My wife, when we got there, so she phoned the agent and said, "Okay, yep, when can you pick us up?" It's like silence. What do you mean when I'm going to pick you up? I said, "No, come down to the." Come down to our offices.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, because I was actually in Perth, and I've got very good friends in Perth, so I go there quite often. There are a lot of South Africans in Perth. And I remember this couple had moved from South Africa, and they had, at that time, it was like 400,000 Rand, which was something like maybe $100,000. And Perth was a lot cheaper than Sydney. And she thought she had so much money, and she couldn't understand why no agents had any interest in driving her around and taking her. And I've got a very good friend in Perth who's a real estate agent, and she works the same way as I do. And, you know, she was driving people around and doing that, but she was horrified that no one was interested in her with her 400,000 Rand, or $100,000 as it was at the time. I mean, you think she would arrive with 40 million in today's money.
Yeah. No, and I think that, you know, the work that you do now, it's so topical in Australia, you know, the discussions about housing, and because, I mean, I don't understand everything about Australia myself, and I think it'll take you a couple of generations to understand everything. The way that I know is that so much of the Australian economy is built on property. And so in the way that the legislation works, in the way that, you know, the you know, how much you pay tax or not pay tax, and what breaks there are, and then also people that have the opportunity to buy more than one property. And so such a big part of the economy of Australia is built on properties not, you know, failing in the process. And everybody says, oh, it's going to go down this year. And I know, I've been here long enough to know that just never happens.
There was a little period in the early 2000s where it was like kind of stabilized, but then it just went crazy. And even during COVID, interest rates rising, everybody thought that it would turn. It didn't. It went crazy. And it continues to go, you know, it just goes up and up. And Australians love real estate. It's interesting because a property opens, every neighbor will go and have a look at it, not whether they're buying or not, but it's like these crowds of people. You think sometimes, don't these people have a life? Haven't they got something else better to do? But they're obsessed. Everybody wants to know everybody. As we say, they want to have a sticky beak. Everybody wants to have it, know everybody's business and look in at everybody, you know, and know what's happening.
And tell us that first kind of couple of years. Now, you come here and you say to yourself, well, it's important that I understand the Australian psyche, because I'm not going to sell houses to people if I don't speak their language. But then you come here and you don't speak their language, right? You speak English, but it's not the same English, isn't that right?
You're going to pick up on a couple of the points I mentioned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, everybody tells us that. I'd like to hear your story.
Okay, so it was funny because the first week I'd started working, and I worked for an Australian company, and I'd been to see a movie on the weekend, and I said to one of my colleagues, oh, you must go and see that movie. Now, in South Africa, you wouldn't think twice. It's just part of the way we speak. And they said to me, you must. And they looked at me, and I said, have I said something wrong? They said, are you giving me an instruction? I said, I'm sorry I offended you. And what have I said wrong? They said, well, the next time you say that, you might want to say, you might want to. And I love this expression in Australia, you might want to do this, or you might want to do that. It doesn't mean you do or you don't. It's like, you're near, what do you want? That kind of expression. So that was quite humorous. The other one was, I was meeting somebody, a client, and I said, how would I recognize you? And she said to me, I will be in a maroon car. Maroon? I didn't want to sound stupid. I thought, now, is this a model or a color? I'm not sure. So I went into one of my colleagues, David. I went into his office, I'll never forget. Said, David, can you tell me who makes maroon cars? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, which factory makes them? He said, Munro, that's a color. I said, what does this color look like? He said, it's like a blue, purpley, reddish blue, purple color. I said, oh, you mean maroon. So the maroon car was a maroon car. And then I realized what I was looking for. And the third one was, I was with a client in the car, and we were driving. We were going down a street, I'll never forget, it was City Road in Chippendale. And there's a huge big park there, Victoria Park. And she was driving around. I said, you know, what are we doing? And she said to me, I'm looking for a park. And I said, but there's a massive park right here. What do you want a park for? She said, no, a place to park the car.
Yeah, it is.
So, you know, these are the funny things that happen. So you actually learn to speak like an Australian. You need to change what you say, how you say it, the way you approach things. And South Africans can be seen to be quite aggressive. Australians feel that we are quite aggressive. I think it's that we are straightforward. And I think the Australian friends that I really have had over the years have all been very similar personalities, because Australia has, as you know, this tall poppy syndrome. And for our South African friends that don't understand what it means, people don't really generally, I think it has changed over the years. They want to hold people down. And I found, the harder you work, the better you wanted to improve yourself. In South Africa, you would be promoted. In Australia, you got demoted. When my boss didn't like it, that I was earning the kind of money I was earning, and called me in and, renegotiated my package downwards, not upwards, and set me, new KPIs to be able to, get ridiculous numbers. And I quickly realized, that this wasn't the way I wanted to work. And I went to another job and another job. And after 3 jobs in 2006, I opened my own business, because I thought the only way, if I'm going to succeed in this country, is I can't work for somebody else. Look, if you're happy doing it, there's nothing wrong with working for somebody else. But he didn't allow me to do that. And I had bigger visions. And the way I could do that, I had to do it on my own. So I had to learn the ropes. I had to learn how to do things. And when I felt confident enough that I understand how the economy works, how, everything's different. You've got to learn. You'd walk into a supermarket in South Africa, you'd see 2 or 3 breads. I'd walk in and there were 14 different loaves of bread. And I didn't know where to start looking. The variety was so much bigger and so much larger, and there was just so much more here. In some ways it was amazing, and in other ways it was antiquated. The shopping centers were nowhere near what we had. The Sandton and, the big shopping centers in South Africa were state-of-the-art, American-style malls. They never even had them here back in 2000. It was strip shops, very much like the UK, and some very, average shopping centers, which were nowhere near what we used to have.
So what was like establishing your business in Australia? Was it tough in the beginning? Did you find it quite easy since you've been here for a few years? How was that transition for you?
Ben, as you know, Australia is highly regulated society. Nothing is easy. Everything is difficult. You can't just do things. In South Africa, you just did things. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, something about the red tape and opening business in Australia. And if you want to open a coffee shop, there are 31 legislative rules and regulations you have to get around. That's to sell somebody a cup of coffee. So, when you're working in financial services or an industry in real estate or finance, and I worked for a financial planner as well when I worked in Australia, the rules and regulations before you can do things can actually put you off rather than motivate you. But you get through it and you actually learn how to do it. You learn the process. It was difficult in the beginning, and it always is. And the interesting thing was, when I started my business, I actually reached out to a few South Africans I know that had done extremely well in Australia. And one particular gentleman gave me quite a lot of work to help me. He was a property developer and built multi-million-dollar buildings. He helped me with business as well, and guided me and coached me. And still a very good friend of mine today. And you just learn. You a boer maak 'n plan.
But that mentorship is so important, can be so important. It's a great asset to have when you're starting out, isn't it?
Yeah, you do. You absolutely need people you can lean on, people that know the ropes, and people that can show you the road.
The thing I want to talk to you a little bit about, and it's kind of a link to mentorship, is that you said that, in the beginning you wanted to make sure that you integrate properly, and then over time you migrate back to say, well, let's find a balance. I need to also make sure that I keep up with my South African friends and make new friends. And then you got involved in the WITS alumni, and as you say, I think there's probably 7,000 of them in Australia. But then you say, well, you do now more, in the sense of do some funding and stuff like that. Tell us about what you do and why you do it.
Okay. Why I do it is because I am very grateful for what I took out of South Africa. It's very sad that we all had to leave for whatever reason we left South Africa, because it was a brain drain on South Africa. South Africa spent a lot of money, effort, and energy educating us all. And I'm very grateful for everything I had, because if I didn't have it, I wouldn't have had been the success that I've had in Australia. And that all came from South Africa. And, when I'm at a point now, where I'm thinking about retiring in a few years' time, I want to start giving back to the community. And I remember my father saying to me that when don't retire and have nothing to do, and because my whole life is around real estate, I work 6-7 days a week, I have to start developing other interests outside of that. And just getting involved with that, getting involved with Southern Crossings, getting involved with the Wits alumni, just seeing the kind of work that they do in South Africa. We had a luncheon. I don't know if you guys came last year at the end of November. It was amazing. We had Gail Kelly, who's another amazing South African who's done extremely well in Australia. And she was our guest speaker. And we had Stephen Kosser from Investec Bank. And, there are a lot of South Africans in Australia that have done exceptionally well and, are highly respected. And, it's just meeting these people. We're all ex-Vitsies, and, it's just wanting to give something back. What I can do, I have relationships with people. I know a lot of wealthy people. I mingle in the right circles, and I'm able to, get people involved and people to give back to the community. And it's just great to see, there's one particular gentleman who gave 100 million rand to Wits to build a new sports center. His family had done very, very well, and he's just the most amazing, generous person. And, being around people like that, it means a lot. And, when you talk about mentoring, Ben, at the early stages, you have mentoring later in life as well, and seeing what other people do and how they invest their time. I could be sitting in coffee shops and doing nothing, but I'd rather be doing this in my spare time, because that's what I enjoy doing.
Oh, fantastic. That's so good to hear, because, like you say, it's easy just to bark off and think of yourself and just look after yourself.
Correct.
But I also think there's some great satisfaction in that, like we know, doing things for others rather than just focusing on yourself and make it meaningful.
Totally.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. It's almost like, and so it's if I think about this conversation, because the route that it follows, and I think the example that you give here, or the leadership, if I can put it that way, that you give here, is to say, look, you've got a lot out of your country where you came from, and so maybe there are different reasons why we all are here.
Yeah.
But you cannot, those are your roots, and then you say, okay, well, it gave you everybody that we interview, Munro, tells us about, and I think you said it as well, about the work ethic that so many South Africans have when they come across,
Fantastic.
or what they have and what they've been brought up. And it's almost like saying, okay, well, I got that. I got the education. Most often all of them had the education before they came across. And then they hear and then they establish and build their business and so on. And then in the end is then you get into these networking groups. And so Southern Crossings is one, the Wits alumni is another one, and they're very strong from what it looks like. And so it says, okay, if there are people that are successful, how do they support the growth in South Africa? What can they do to help there, or anything? Because, you can't never take those roots away and say,
Correct.
because we all have family that are still there somewhere, right?
And I went to another event last week as well, just as a connection, which is the South African, how do they call it? It's the accountants, South African Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia. And there were 200 accountants, which are all South African, in different levels, working in jobs, having their own businesses. And it's amazing that we all reach out, and it's such a lovely feeling when we all connect with each other again. So good. And a lot of them are married to Australians, and they bring their partners. These people knew nothing about South Africa, and, now they're integrated, with the South African culture and meeting people. And it's so lovely. It really is.
And some of us have got grandkids that are now Australian. We won't say who, but some of us do.
And they speak with very
Yes,
different
and
accents.
it is wonderful. Yeah, well, they're still 4 months, so no. But yes, you're right, and I think that. So I don't want to, I want to emphasize the point. I think it's wonderful work that you do, Munro. It's wonderful thoughts that you have on that, because it's so easy to say, well, I've worked for all my, the stuff that I have, the wealth that I have, or whatever I've created, and now I can just sit and retire and take a trip around Australia, which I suppose you can do. But also then say, well, what else can I do? And as your father said to you, if one just retires and sit and do nothing, I suppose you'll be useless, right? And so that's not the point.
Absolutely.
One has got to be useful to people, and you might as well be useful for where you come from.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the job that I do as a buyer's agent, the work that I do, I'm constantly helping people. I'm changing people's lives. It's the biggest investment they'll probably make, even they're buying a home. I'm changing their lives. I'm getting involved with their families. A lot of my clients become my friends. And, I'm taking on huge responsibilities. People are giving me $1 million and $10 million to go and buy property for them and trusting me to do the right thing by them. It's a huge responsibility that you take on. And, I don't take it lightly.
Yeah. So let me ask you, sort of coming to the end of our discussion, but I think the thing that I'm really, and Ben and I would be interested in, is to say, well, you've been here for almost 30 years. If you have to say, well, what are if somebody else considering coming across, or maybe they are fresh off the boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
What are the things that you'd say to them? What should they be doing?
Come with a lot of money.
Okay, well, that's not always the option.
When you're coming with rands, it's not always the option. No, look, what you've got to do is, I think with no disrespect, the way we were brought up in South Africa, we always had people running around doing things for us. You have to be open and be prepared to learn how the washing machine works, how the dishwasher works. I mean, I've seen so many people come here and they freak out when they see a washing machine. You think they've seen a monster because they've never had to switch one on in South Africa. So I'm not saying everybody generally, but, it's very hard and the older you are, the harder it is. It's hard to make friends. I've got a friend that's moved here. He's in his He's come to retire here. He was bored. He wanted to start working. He actually worked with me for a few months and just found it very hard, very challenging. It's not the same. It's definitely not the same. You need to integrate. And, people used to say, there was this fantastic saying, if you want to make a small fortune in Australia, come with a big fortune from South Africa. Because if you don't understand the way things work, you're not going to be in the best position. And, it doesn't matter how much money you've got or how much experience you've got. Work for an Australian company, mix with Australian people, learn how things work, adapt. Don't always think we know better. We have some great talent. We have some great skills. We know great things, but we don't know better when we come here. We learn as we go. So be open-minded. It's a fantastic life. It's a great country, fantastic for children, security and the safety. After my experience in South Africa, and I was living near King's Cross in Rushcutters Bay, and I came back 2:00 in the morning one night on a train, and I walked in the station and I looked around and I said, I actually feel safe. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm walking around in the middle of the city and I don't feel threatened. And that was more important to me than any money in the world.
Yeah. No, and I agree. And I think that, I don't know what you're hearing, Ben, but I'm hearing from Munro is this whole thing about being flexible, understand that it might look the same here, but it's not. And you got to be prepared to work, and you got to be prepared to do the small things in order to get to the bigger things.
Yeah.
So if you're not prepared to, iron your shirt, well, you're going to have a problem here.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, Anton, they said to me, so what's the difference between living in Australia and living in South Africa? And I said, very easy. We do everything the same, except we do the washing, cooking, cleaning, and ironing as well. And they said to me, really? I said, yes.
Yeah, and it is, and it's actually really liberating also in that sense, because we have a house and we specifically got the house because it had a nice size yard, and because I felt it's much better to go and work in the garden than it is to go to gym, and so that's what I do. And so I
Absolutely.
purposely did it, and it is very fulfilling too. No, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Ben, any last sort of question from you, or before we close?
No, look, I think that's a great ending. It's informative, good learning, and yeah, just inspiring to hear that story. And the fact that you are happy and you feel safe. And money can't buy that thing. So yeah, I think that's what I take out of it.
Yeah. And Ben
Yeah,
and
and it
Anton, I'm very much open to anybody, listening to the podcast. It's anybody that comes over to Australia. Give me a shout, reach out to me. I'm happy to have a cup of coffee with you, have a chat with you, talk to you. Because when I came here, there were a few people that did that for me, and I remember their names 27 years later. There weren't a lot, but there were a few, and I'll never forget them.
No, and I encourage that too.
They can just look up my name, Google it, you'll find me, reach out, give me a call, let's meet for a coffee, and I'm happy to make it easy if I can, give you some guidance, some advice, some suggestions, and bring you into some of our South African networks. We've got fantastic networks here.
Well, there you go. So now for anybody, you've got an open invitation to give Munro a call. You'll find him. He's not hard to find, Munro Donen, and so I think that it's been a fantastic conversation, Munro, and I really, really appreciate it in your open and candid way that you did things, and you've got some fantastic memories, some of them a bit haunting and traumatic, but you got through that, and I'm really glad that you did. Otherwise, we couldn't have had this interview, so I really appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
And also,
it was wonderful.
Yeah, and for your time, and it's been wonderful talking to you.
Awesome.
So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Wonderful. Take care.